Great. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Particularly big thank you to Nicole Brown and the Alliance for hosting this webinar and providing this to everyone free of charge. You do such tremendous work that we all benefit from, so I hope we can do you justice today. Just to let everyone know, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on YouTube, I believe from tomorrow. I think a link is being sent around, so look out for that. Also, as we progress through the presentation, please do write your questions down in the chat box so that we can pick them up and answer them at the end. Okay, next slide. So over the next 40 minutes or so, these are the topics we will be discussing, and you'll see us navigate through as we progress. So I'll do a brief introduction to the presenters and an introduction to children on the move. Then we'll have a case study on social service professional collaboration, children arriving through Greece, and children arriving in the UK as a final destination. Next slide. Great. So first I'd like to tell you a little bit about who you'll be hearing from. I am Carolyn Houseman, CEO of Children and Families Across Borders. I have been here for 3 years, and I have a background in policy development against sex trafficking, particularly in former Yugoslavia, and have worked for Amnesty International, the Washington Office on Latin America, and a few other organizations. My colleague Katie is a social worker here at CFAB. She has worked in the UK Statutory Children's Services with unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in care, kinship foster carers, and privately fostered children, as well as having experience of court social work for private family law. She has worked in various roles with people who are seeking asylum or who have refugee status, as well as people who are survivors of torture. Next slide. Of course, we, Katie and I, represent Children and Families Across Borders, also known as CFAB. We are the UK branch of International Social Service, a network established just after World War I to provide assistance on cases involving vulnerable children and adults that cross international borders. We are present in over 120 countries around the world, and all of our partners are local NGOs or government institutions. And our General Secretariat is based in Geneva. Next slide. In the UK, we offer a wide range of services, which begins with our free advice line, which receives over 2,000 calls a year, largely from social workers handling international cases. We do child protection alerts, so that would be notifying overseas authorities if there's a child at risk of harm. We do social service checks, so informing child protection investigations, parenting, kinship assessments, or the application for a foster care or adoption. We do welfare visits and overseas assessments, particularly to inform care planning, so assessing family members to care for a child or if a child is subject to care proceedings. And we do Dublin assessments and have done assisted voluntary return assessments. We also do our post-placement visits, and we'll be hearing a little bit more about that from Katie. And we offer a wide variety of training both here in the UK and to organizations around the world. Next slide. Across the world, our ISS partners in other countries offer even more services than we do, as you can see here. From adoption to surrogacy, we cover a wide range of international social service issues. And I will now hand over briefly to my colleague Laura, who will tell you a little bit about herself, her colleague Stefania, and a bit about Safe Passage. Next slide.
Thank you. So my name is Laura Griffiths, and I'm the head of programs at Safe Passage International. And I was involved in founding of the organisation of the Safe Passage project in September 2015. I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleague Stefania Tomansini from our Greek team. She has a wealth of experience supporting children on the move, both in Italy and Greece, and also upon arrival in the UK. Next slide, please. So Safe Passage is a registered charity. We are a strategic organisation with a legal focus. We contribute to system change in European refugee policy at both the national, state and EU level, ensuring that safe legal routes to sanctuary exist for all people seeking asylum, especially children. We create routes for the many by opening them for the few, which is our strategic approach. And we have 3 goals and areas that we work in. The first being safe routes. So this is to open and defend safe legal routes to sanctuary for those seeking asylum. So this involves our work around direct legal casework, also strategic litigation. The next is safe children. This is to protect and defend the rights of every child travelling to safety and upon arrival in their new home, wherever that may be. This has been a big part of our partnership that we will talk about later in terms of the work that we do with children and families across borders. And this is where my colleague Stefania does the most of her work, which she will be talking about later. We also do safe support, which is to increase and cement public and political support for protection for those seeking asylum. So this is our public and political advocacy work that we do both in the UK and in our other European countries which we operate. Next slide, please. As I talked a little bit about, the kind of the 3 goals and ways of working that Safe Passage have. This is our intervention model. We use campaigns and advocacy, field operations and strategic litigation to open safe and legal routes. We assess the situation to determine which tool or which stream of work will be the most successful and which stream of work needs to lead in order to break open this safe and legal route for those seeking asylum. And I will be talking a little bit about that later on in the webinar. From our experience, we know that we need to be nimble in the approaches that we're putting in the different and often ever-changing situations. We are a cross-border organisation with operations in UK, France and Greece. We directly have supported more than 250 children reach safety. We predominantly focus our work on family reunion. So these are children who are joining their loved ones in other European countries, although this isn't, our work isn't exclusive to family reunification. More than 2,000 children have reached safety through the routes we have opened. This statistic relates to the strategic work that we do. We are there to open routes for the many by supporting the few to go through them. So we will take on cases that not only help that individual reach safety and reach their loved one, but also will create a bigger impact that will lead to more children reaching safety. We have trained more than 1,000 people. Predominantly, these are legal practitioners. I'm sorry, I'm still on the previous slide. Thank you. These are predominantly legal practitioners. So we're informing them about how they can utilize the law to support children reach safety, but we also extend this to social workers and other key support workers that are involved in supporting children on the move throughout their journey. This means that they can be more aware in order to make sure these children are accessing the rights and these individuals are able to advocate for them. For example, new routes we have opened since 2019 are Italy to Norway, Bulgaria to Italy, Austria to the UK, Iceland to the UK, and Libya to Italy. Thank you. Next slide.
Great, thank you, Laura. This is Carolyn again, and now I'd like to very briefly give you some context to our topic, which is children on the move in Europe. What we cover here is complemented by a blog I've written for the Alliance, which you can find on their website. Children on the move is a very large global issue with an estimated 50 million children on the move, according to UNICEF. This includes children who are refugees, economic migrants, trafficked, exploited, holidaymakers, and more. The drivers of child migration are often multiple, complex, layered, and fluid. So today we are just isolating a few aspects of children on the move to highlight why and how it has attracted so much attention in Europe in recent years and what social service practitioners can do about it. Next slide. This gives you an overview of asylum applications in Europe over the last 9 years. Of course, not all children on the move are seeking asylum. However, you can see the gradual rise from 2012 to 2014 and a significant peak in 2015 at around 1.3 million asylum applications, excluding the UK, prompting a so-called state of crisis. We know, of course, the Syrian civil war began in 2011, which contributed to the rise. The UK share of asylum applications is quite low, you can see, at around 10% in 2009, falling to about 3% in 2015. At the end of 2015, the EU relocation scheme was put in place for EU member states to share responsibility of the increased migrants arriving. Through the scheme, more than 22,000 individuals relocated from Greece and more than 12,500 relocated from Italy until the scheme closed in 2017. And you'll see by 2017, the UK was the sixth largest recipient of asylum applications in the European Economic Area. Application numbers were more than 6 times higher than Germany, 3.8 times higher than in Italy, and 3 times higher than in France. Next slide. This map shows the use of refugee and migrant children in Greece in July 2017. Stefania will speak more to this point in a bit, but you'll note that some regions are more affected than others, also prompting, I think, a bit of focus and in some cases backlash against migrants in the region. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to hand back over to Laura to talk about social service professional collaboration.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk briefly about the start of Safe Passage. So Safe Passage is quite a new organisation. It was founded on a reaction of a few individuals to the emerging refugee crisis in Europe in 2015. And specifically what was happening in Calais in northern France, where at its peak, around 11,000 people were stranded there. The situation in Calais was an unofficial refugee camp called the Jungle. Next slide, please. Some independent volunteers and barristers went out to the camp to try and understand the situation there. Next slide. We saw many organisations and volunteers providing key supplies to the refugees and the group that was growing and growing. The individuals there quickly realised that legal routes to asylum and safety were just as vital as tents and sleeping bags in this emerging situations. We worked to connect with community leaders in the camps to try and better understand, who was living here, what was the situation that was emerging for our very eyes, just 20 miles across the channel in France. We quickly
Laura, I'm sorry, we're having trouble hearing you. You're a little faint. We're getting some messages from people ahead. Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay, apologies everybody. My microphone slipped down a little bit. So yes, as I was saying, the situation there was very close to the UK. So we connected with community leaders to try and understand it better. And what we soon realised was there were a significant number of children on the move who were unaccompanied. At its peak at this time, it reached between 2,000 and 3,000 individuals. Through a series of one-to-one interviews, we learned that many of these children had family members in the UK, and our legal team went back to the UK to pursue legal options for these children. Were there any available? It became apparent that there was an EU law called Dublin III that was mainly used to return asylum seekers from EU countries to the first country they had fingerprinted in or entered to Europe from. But part of this law had a clause which stated that an unaccompanied child or a child on the move that was unaccompanied did not have to claim asylum in the first safe country, but was able to do that in a country where they had a loved one that would look after them, where they had a family member. This law had never been operationalised between France and Britain before for children, and the legal team went to work in the UK, supported by our field team operations in Calais and a team of campaigners in the UK. In January 2015, after 14,000 pro bono legal hours, 4 individuals won a court case which saw them transferred within 24 hours to be with their family members. And these were 3 Syrian children and an older dependent, a vulnerable adult, older brother. This was known as the ZAT ruling, Z-A-T, and it kick-started Dublin 3 family reunion as a mechanism across France and then to many other EU member states where it wasn't operationalised. Our campaigns and advocacy team had worked successfully to gain public opinion and positive political will on both sides to really receive a lot of positivity when these children arrived at St Pancras Station in January 2015. Over the next 4 to 6 months, more than 50 children were transferred through this law and to safety to be with their loved ones. We quickly realised there was more work to be done, and this is when we began thinking about the work in the UK and what that looks like, and we'll hear from our colleagues at CFAB about that later on in the webinar, and that's certainly a focus of our partnership as we continue our work. I wanted to share that background and also talk a little bit about partnerships that we've worked on in Calais. So I'd like to share another example of that. Next slide, please. And this is an example of our multidisciplinary approach and the collaboration between field operations, litigation and advocacy. And when I talk about field operations in this context, I'm very much talking about social workers, caseworkers working directly in the field with children on the move on a day-to-day basis. My colleague Stefania will be providing information on the Greek context and giving some case studies from Greece, but I wanted to share this with you quickly. So as I briefly described earlier, the situation of the camp in Calais, our campaigns team in the UK were working with members of the UK Parliament and Lord Alf Dubs, which the scheme, the relocation scheme was then named after. And they were working to come up with an amendment of the existing UK immigration bill that would see the transfer of children within Europe, so children on the move within Europe who were unaccompanied to the UK to be looked after by local authorities. The amendment to this bill was a great success, an example of the campaign, a real win for our campaign's work. However, this happened in March 2016, and by October 2016, no transfers of children had taken place. The bill stated that 3,000 unaccompanied children could be transferred, but none had happened yet. We had UK communities speaking out, saying that they would be willing and able to host these children, yet there was no movement from the Home Office on it. One of the criteria the Home Office gave was around the best interest of the child, and that it needed to be in the best interest of the child to be reunited, to be transferred to the UK. Safe Passage managed to collect a list of over 200 children that were eligible under this criteria, although we struggled as an organisation without the social worker skills to determine that best interest assessment. We did a call to social workers in the UK and were able to facilitate social workers volunteering to come out to Calais to conduct 36 best interest assessment of these children. We were very fortunate, or these social workers were very fortunate, that their local authorities, who were their employers, were giving them this time off for free to be able to come out and volunteer with us to conduct these assessments. The collaboration was really positive for the children, as it meant that these intensive interviews that they conducted with the social workers weren't then repeated when these children met their lawyers. The information they shared with the lawyers was much more top level, so it didn't go into the same amount of detail that often can be traumatic for children, having to repeat their stories again and again. With the support of the social workers, the lawyers were able to put together a legal bundle of all these children, and this was sent directly to the Home Office. Although we received no official response from the Home Office, within 48 hours of sending this bundle, transfers started to happen. So these children started to be transferred from living in a desperate situation in the Calais jungle to safely to the UK, where they were allocated families in local authorities across the UK. And over 220 of these children were transferred in the next, I think it was 6 to 8 weeks. So I just wanted to share that as an example of collaboration and how this really has been able to support children on the move in the context of the work that Safe Passage does. Next slide, thank you. Yeah, next slide, thanks.
Okay, I think we're going to hand over to Stefania, who's going to talk us through her work in Greece. Over to you, Stefania.
Yes, hi everyone. This is Stefania, and I'm talking from the Safe Passage team in Greece. The team here is relatively small and is composed by a manager who is a solicitor and runs the operation, and also a legal coordinator who works closely with the legal teams in London and France. As for myself, I work as a caseworker and I support the legal team to assess the referral that we receive on behalf of young people who wanted to apply for family reunification, to get in touch with them, to make a first assessment and provide advice and information up to the stage when the young person application has been accepted and the young person is ready to leave Greece and join the relatives in another European country. I will start giving some number and then a general legal framework under which we operate. And at the end, I'd like to share with you some issues and challenges that young people and support workers face in the Greek context. So as you can see from this chart, Greece is, together with Italy and Spain, one of the countries that received most of the migrants and asylum seekers in Europe, and over the last year has been the country with the highest number of arrival, with around 19,000 people arrived in the first 6 months of 2019. On the next slide, as far as the unaccompanied minors are concerned, statistics say that between 2016 and 2018, 17,000 unaccompanied children arrivals were officially recorded in Greece. Well, the number is even higher if we consider that not everyone is registered and does not take into account the number of young people who leaves the country avoiding registration. In general, it's been calculated that over the first quarter of 2018, Greece received almost half of all migrant children arrivals in Europe. On the next slide, still on some numbers, you will see the latest number recorded by ECHA, which is the National Center for Social Solidarity and is the statutory service which provides social support services to population in crisis and in need of emergency social aid. The update is very recent, so is of September 2019. And what is interesting here is that aggregates the number of unaccompanied minors and the type of their accommodation. On the right-hand side column, the last one, you can see in the gray color the number of young people living in reception and identification center or protective custody or temporary accommodation. These places, inaugurated in 2015 and known as hotspots, were created with the aim to provide administrative service for new arrivals, such as identification, first reception, medical check, and delivering information about the asylum. They are in 5 islands. You might have known about the Moria camp in Lesbos, and were not created to provide mid or long-term accommodation. Also, it's very important to understand that they operate under geographical restriction, and migrants have the obligation to reside at the hotspot facility for a certain period of time. Young people, unaccompanied young people, as a rule, are prohibited from moving freely on the islands and remain in this reception center under restriction of liberty or in protective custody. So they spend really lengthy period in these reception identification centers while waiting for a place in an age-appropriate shelter or other facilities. It's also interesting to say that the part in grey color says about how many children are living in informal accommodation. So I'm thinking about family who pay privately, maybe from the UK, so that the young person can have an accommodation in Greece, but also squats, and a part of these young people are homeless. So in general, we have now, at September 2019, 1,800 children in kind of emergency accommodation in reception and identification center on the island, and 1,200 in unknown accommodation conditions. On the graphic below, you can see how it has evolved, and how the number of unaccompanied young people placed in protective custody and a reception center has evolved from December 2018 until September, and I'm afraid that the number has doubled. The light blue and the dark blue color are for young people in mid and long-term accommodation, which are around 1,700. And the next slide gives you an overview of where these accommodations are placed within Greece. So the blue and light blue colors are defining the shelters, long-term shelters or semi-independent accommodation for young people reaching 18, or also what they call safe zones, which are designed for children, but they are inside generally temporary accommodation. So this is the situation of numbers and which kind of accommodation are the young people placed in. On the next slide, these are again some numbers, and it's the focus is more just on the reception center on the island, and you might be aware of the crisis that we had in 2015, or what they called crisis, with the highest number of people coming, and it seems that now the number are increasing again as in 2015. On the next slide, you will find the main legal framework for the protection of children in Greece, which is obviously designed in line with the Convention of the Right of the Child that in Greek became legislation in 1992, and it's applicable to all children on Greek territory, regardless their nationality, their ethnic origin, and of course, regardless their immigrator status. So this is also for young people who not claim asylum, but they are under 18. The four general principles to bear in mind are, of course, the principle of non-discrimination. It means that migrant children are equal to locals, and asylum seeker children are equal to non-asylum seeker children. Of course, the best interest of the child principle, and of course, for our purpose, we need to assess basically if it's in the best interest of the child to join the relatives in another country. Another important principle is the child right to life, survival, and development, and of course, the child rights to express their view. Another important, very important law in Greece is the law that was made in 2018 and defines the framework of the guardianship for unaccompanied minors in Greece. And under this framework, appointed guardians have the responsibility related to the care and the integration of an accompanied minor. And of course, as for any adults claiming international protection, is the Greek asylum and immigration policies of 2016 that regulates the asylum service in general and the procedures through which minors go while they are in this country. So on the next slide, of course, according to this legal framework, unaccompanied children living outside their country are entitled to what they call an alternative care, so a care which is obviously different from the family care. In practice, the alternative care involves the placement of the child in a child-friendly accommodation. Where possible, we should try to keep siblings and family together after an assessment of their capability to take the children in the family. We should make sure that the child has access to the education, and also that every child can exercise the right to the higher standard of health. And we should make sure that the child has a legal assistant and it is appointed with a guardian. It's also important to remind that it's the Committee of the Right of the Child that consider the family reunification as a durable solution for children without parents in Europe. So who is in Greek who would make sure that these entitlements above are respected and implemented? As we said, according with the law 2018, should be the guardian, who is selected from a registry of guardians created under the National Center for Social Solidarity, so from the government. Now, unfortunately, it seems that for the majority of cases, children's rights and entitlements are not respected. And on the next slide, I put down some of the main challenges that are faced by young people and also by professionals working with them. And I'll focus mainly on two of them, in particular concerning the first reception and identification and the lack of guardianship. So one of the main challenges is right at the arrival in Greece, and is related with the first reception and identification. The number of existing reception and identification centers that I showed you on the map before, and the places available within them are very little compared with the numerous points of entry to the country and also the number of people arriving. And so due to lack of these facilities, young people are placed in protective custody or at regional police station or in safe zone in this hotspot. And most of the time they share the same space with adults in overcrowded environment, for sure not child-friendly, and they spend long time. It should be no more than 3 days, but most of the cases they stay there for more than 2 months, pending their transfer to an accommodation facility. Of course, there are also issues with the declaration of age and the identity, where, for instance, you might have young people declaring to be adults because they are trafficked or because they are told by agents that they can leave Greece to other European countries more easily if they are over age. So at the first reception, rarely age assessment and assessment in general are carried out. So what does this mean for professionals working in destination countries such as the UK? That, well, you might have, for instance, be providing support to a young person that has joined this family, but whose age and vulnerabilities have been wrongly assessed or undermined at the arrival in Greece, because maybe they have declared an age instead of the other, and no assessment has been carried out. On the next slide, sorry, it's the same slide, but another thing that I wanted to highlight, that another main challenge is, of course, the lack of guardianship and therefore the access to the main rights. So despite the law that I was talking to you before, the system of guardianship, it's not operating. And this, what does it mean? It means that, for instance, in Athens, the only prosecutor for minors is responsible for thousands of children. And of course, there is no contact between the guardian and the child, who is legally left without access to the national protection system. So you need to imagine that the daily task that requests consent of a guardian are numerous. To enroll someone in school, to enroll a young person in school, you need the signature of a guardian. To carry out a best interest assessment, you should have a guardian, for instance, for the family reunification, to declare that this is the best interest of the child to join the family. And so in this sense, you might understand how enormous is like the implication for all the aspect of the protection of the young people here. Of course, the charities are replacing this lack, this gap, but it's not enough, and it's not really clear who at the end is responsible, legally responsible for the young person without family here. So, and again, how these has an impact on us as support worker, and then on the professional who will be working with young people moving around Europe and arriving, for instance, in the UK. As you might see, young people have not straightforward access, to family reunification process, because without a guardian who can sign a best interest assessment, it's not possible to have the procedures initiated. And it's not rare at all that young people decide to undertake illegal and very dangerous and unsafe journey in order to reach their relatives. And of course, we know how dangerous and how many vulnerabilities the last part of the journey in Europe from Greece, for instance, to France and to UK means for someone who have been already traumatized in their country of origin. Just very briefly, for instance, I wanted to share with you the experience of a young person that we have been trying and still trying to support. And this young person is from Syria, is 17 years old, and arrived without family in Greece, and he has an uncle in the UK, and the uncle is ready to for the young person to join the family, and the young person can't wait to join their family, the uncle in the UK. The young person arrived on a boat to an hotspot island, and he was registered as a minor in August 2019. The relatives in the UK got in touch with our team, and they of course explained that the young person was living in terrible condition inside the container. So the team in Greece contacted a local NGO to trace where the young man was in that camp, and also an organization in Athens who is running a project to implement the guardianship. We were informed that the young person was there in the camp and he was registered as a minor, but we at the same time were also told that there was just one guardian for thousands and thousands of minors on the same island. So we tried to we made efforts to put the guardian and the child together. So thankfully the guardian made contact with the young person, but again, he could not provide further assistance because the boy could not be transferred outside the island to the geographical restriction that I talked to you about, and due to the lack of accommodation in the mainland. And he was not even registered as asylum seeker by the asylum service, and it means that he did not have access to, he could not apply for family reunification as soon as possible, because the two processes go together. So you have to apply for the asylum, and then you will have to declare that you want to join your family. But if you are not registered as an asylum seeker, you will not be able to apply for family reunification. So the young person is still there. There is a legal deadline, which is very important for us, because you have 3 months to submit a claim from the Dublin unit in Greece to the UK Dublin unit. And of course, if this deadline is not met, it means that legally will be much more difficult to apply. So what our legal team is trying to do is to put in pressure on the Dublin unit so that all the paper and the request is sent as soon as possible, and then hopefully the young person in a few months will be able to come to the mainland in Greece and then to join their family in the UK. And that's it from me.
Great, thank you so much, Stefania. I think we will now move on to Katie's final presentation on children arriving in the UK as a final destination. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Next slide. Okay, so as Carolyn mentioned, I'm Katie and I'm a social worker in the CFAB team leading on the post-placement support project. So I'll start by briefly explaining the project, and then I'll move on to a post-placement case study that will draw out some of the knowledge and skills for social workers working with children on the move. So the project works with families who have been reunited across international borders, mainly via the Dublin III regulation, as we heard about from Laura. So this is mostly children and young people who are joining their adult family members in the UK. So families will sometimes face challenges once they have been reunited in the UK. And one of those barriers is a lack of professional knowledge around entitlement to services for people seeking asylum and refugees, as well as discrimination towards this group, which is made worse by the hostile environment in the UK. So to briefly explain, the hostile environment in the UK is a set of policies that are aimed at people who are undocumented. But these policies affect more people than just that group of undocumented people. They also disproportionately affect people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. And that creates a lot of problems for families accessing services. So the charity Liberty has got a really good fact sheet on the hostile environment and kind of paints a picture of what that looks like in practice for families. So I've put a link to this document on the final slide of the presentation, and I'd recommend having a look to sort of try and understand a bit about the context of discrimination that refugees living in host countries can face. So next slide, please. So I'm going to look at an anonymised case study now from the post-placement project that I work on, and hopefully draw out some key themes and skills that might be useful for social workers working with children on the move. So next slide. So the case study is Mohammed and Samir. So Mohammed and Samir, aged 23 and 13, are two cousins originally from Syria. When CFAB received a referral from a refugee charity, Samir was due to arrive to the UK from France to come and live with Mohammed. Samir left Syria with his sister and mother but lost track of them during the journey. Mohammed was an unaccompanied asylum-seeking child himself when he first arrived in the UK several years before. Prior to their departure from Syria, Mohammed and Samir had witnessed Samir's father being shot outside their family home. Samir does not know where his mother is and has lost contact with her. So next slide. Next slide, please. So one of the first things and one of the key learning points from this this case was to look around preparing the carer prior to the arrival of the young person. So obviously, as social workers and caseworkers, we're not always able to prepare for young people arriving due to the irregular nature that some of their journeys can take. But for this case, and in Dublin 3 cases, we often are aware, maybe only slightly beforehand, but we're aware that a young person may be arriving. So before Samir's arrival to the UK, the social worker met with Mohammed to prepare him on what it means to care for a young person and the role of a parent in the UK. So for Mohammed, he was a young person himself, and wasn't aware of some of the law in the UK around parenting and what the expectations of him might be. So preparing him for that was really important. And we could also take the time to talk about some of the practical issues that could arise. And Mohammed was able to explore his financial situation with us, and we found that he had some debts that would make it difficult for him to support his brother. So we were able to start work on that before the arrival of Samir. And because those processes had started already, we could move on to focus on other issues once Samir was here. Next slide. So arrival to the UK. So after Samir arrived, the social met with both Samir and Mohammed to understand Samir's wishes and feelings about being in the UK, any worries he had and his hopes for the future. So on the right, you can see an image of the 3 houses tool, which is something that I use with young people, and it's taken from the Signs of Safety approach, which started in Australia. So there's a house of worries, a house of good things, and a house of dreams, and it can be quite good for working with children whose first language might not be English. The young person can use pictures or drawings in order to express how they feel, or you might just want to use it as a tool to facilitate discussion with the young person. So we also created a family support plan and worked in partnership with a local charity who knew Mohammed quite well. And this joint working was really important in terms of information gathering and also dividing work between organisations to make sure that we drew on each other's strengths. So working in collaboration with Safe Passage, for example,
their big strength is their legal knowledge, and so it's really good to have that collaboration between organisations. And really important at this stage, on that note, which isn't mentioned on this slide, is the need for legal advice for young people as soon as possible. So as social workers in general, it's our role to ensure that young people get professional legal advice, not to give that advice ourselves, but to make sure that that happens for that young person. Next slide, please. So the next kind of key issue when working with children on the move can be working effectively with interpreters, and that I find that if you do that well, it can also really help in building your relationship with the young person. So one of the big things would be to ensure that you face and speak directly to the person and not the interpreter. Doing this can support the building trust and rapport despite a language barrier, as you can communicate with your body language as well. If you're not looking at someone, it's much more difficult to create a connection with them. So always use registered interpreters as well, who have an understanding of confidentiality, and ensure that the young person understands what confidentiality means. So linking in with that point is that some young people may be wary of interpreters, and this might be because the young person is from a small community, or because there is a cultural political dynamic that prevents them from being open and honest in front of a person from the same nationality or culture. So it kind of makes sense that if a young person is fleeing state violence against them, for example, that they might feel worried about speaking with someone who is also from that state. And it's important that you kind of clarify those things with the young person. So the next slide, please. So the next slide is around well-being. So both the young people in this case study that I worked with were experiencing sleep disturbances and nightmares. And the eldest cousin had a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. So amongst other things, this made it really difficult for the young people to sleep in one room. They only had one room in the house they were living in. So whilst making an application to housing, supporting the cousins to do that, the social worker also worked directly with Samir and Mohammed to create a sleep routine to help with their immediate situation. So on the next slide, there's something really important to bear in mind when working with children is the impact of their journeys from their home country to the host country. And sleep can be a big part of that. So sometimes sleep disturbance can be an indicator of a mental health issue or post-traumatic stress disorder in a young person. But at other times it can just be a much more practical issue that's linked to the journey that they've had and the experiences on that journey. So a really useful resource that I found is a website called You Ask Health, which was a project developed in Kent with unaccompanied young people in the reception centres there. And on the website, they've got lots of PowerPoints and resources for professionals, with information about health for unaccompanied young people, and that includes mental health. So they've got some information there about sleep, semi-starvation, and other needs. So they give an insight into why a child might struggle to sleep on their arrival, given their experiences. So it's safer to sleep in the daylight, risks of beatings or imprisonment if caught without papers. So travel at night, huddle in groups to sleep for warmth and safety. In the cover of darkness, attempts made to board trucks, traffickers operate in the cover of darkness. So in this context, you might begin to kind of see why young people might struggle to go back into an ordinary routine of sleep when they arrive somewhere where they feel safe with a family member. So providing young people with a sleep pack on their arrival can support them to return to a better sleep pattern. And there's information about that on the website. Next slide, please. So a bit more about mental well-being. So some young people or adults might come from a country where mental health concerns carry a stigma, or they're not used to speaking openly about difficulties. And that might mean that initially the young person is unwilling to engage in support services, or they might feel offended or feel that you're saying that there's something wrong with them. So some of the ways, if you feel somebody does need support, to consider broaching that might be to explain trauma to the young person as it's processed in the brain, and normalize their responses to their experience. So explaining it in terms of that they are responding to events that have happened to them, there's not something intrinsically wrong with them, can be quite useful. So depending on the child and their understanding, you might want to do that in a kind of quite scientific way, to explain that. Another thing to consider is group work with young people, so they might want to share experiences with each other about how they find what their journeys were like, or their mental health now. And just finally, it's good to note that not all refugees and asylum seekers have mental health problems. And that sounds like quite an obvious thing to say, but aside from it being stigmatizing to see things like that, it can also mean that we miss more practical issues that, if addressed, could actually improve someone's well-being without needing to go to professional services. So the next slide links with that again, and relates to building trust with the young person. So as a social worker, it's really important that we explain our role, and we explain it in simple terms, given that lots of countries don't have social workers, or they might not understand what it is that we do. So some local authorities will provide children with an information sheet, sometimes in their first language, that it just explains who the people are around them and what they can expect them to do and what they might expect from them. So this can really help, because there's a lot of instances of children going missing, particularly unaccompanied children who are in care, and understanding who you are and what your role is with them can kind of help with that sometimes. And yeah, just to point out that it's really important to make sure that the young person understands that you are not immigration enforcement. The social work role isn't about deciding somebody's asylum claim. It's about supporting young people and making sure that decisions are made in their best interests. So that also doesn't mean sharing all information you have with the Home Office, for example. That's something that you need to bear in mind, the role of support. And then finally, just to show the family support plan that we use on the project on the next slide. Again, using a kind of signs of safety approach, looking at different domains within someone's life. So looking at housing, health, well-being, education, etc. Looking at what's going well, what the worries might be, and then what needs to happen for that to get better for the family. So some of the positives of using this approach I found with families is that it can really help to create trust, because it's quite a transparent process. The family know what you've discussed, they know what you're going to do, they know what they're expected to do, and it also gives a space for the family's views to be heard and recorded. Yeah, and then just on the next slide, there's just a few resources that might be useful to look at, and some of which I've mentioned already in the presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. So as Katie said, you've got a couple of resources there that you may just want to note down, and you'll have more guidance in the blog that I've written on the Alliance website, as well as other resources on the Alliance website. I will particularly highlight the first resource guide for professionals working with vulnerable children on the move, which promotes the development of a well-connected transnational network of child protection professionals and proposes an 8-step procedure to deliver a holistic continuity of care. So you'll find that on the Alliance website. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. I hope that's been a helpful overview of children on the move in Europe and the role of social service professionals. The webinar is part of the Alliance's Social Service Workforce Week. Please do check the link above for more blogs and resources. If you aren't signed up already to the Alliance, you really must be. It's free to join, and even if you need to pay any money, which you don't, it would be well worth it. Please note that this is a recording, and many others will be available on the Alliance website shortly. And as I think Nicole sent around a message, you will get a link to that very soon. So we do have just a little bit of time for questions and answers. If people had any questions during the course of the webinar. I think we may have had a question around for Katie, around the main issues for families that you encounter. So what do you see for the young people arriving? Is it more around finance, housing, mental health, immigration, etc.? What are the biggest challenges that they're facing?
So one of the biggest challenges for families arriving in the UK is actually housing. There's a lot of difficulty in families being able to get appropriate housing with, and for the young person to have their own room, for example, is quite rare in the cases that I've seen. They're often sharing with their family member, or the adult family member is sleeping on the floor. That can often happen, and in part that's a result of the housing crisis and a lack of housing for people who need council housing. There's also I've experienced quite a lot of issues with just access to services in general, so registering with a GP or getting into college, and quite a lot of confusion from frontline professionals as to whether asylum seekers are entitled to access those services. And so kind of being aware of what the entitlements of asylum seekers are, and not just assuming that they are not entitled to something, is quite an important part of the social work role when working with this group, I think.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was really helpful. Unless there are any other burning questions, I think that we may need to call time on this discussion. But thank you, Katie and Laura and Stefania, for sharing your knowledge with us. And I hope this has been of value to everyone. Thank you again to the Alliance for putting this together. And thank you to particularly to Nicole for helping us through this with the technology. And you've got there all of the links that you need to see the other webinars for the Social Service Workforce Week and to sign up for the Alliance membership, which again, I do strongly encourage you to do. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great week.